Good morning, everyone. Senator Capito, I just want to start off our hearing today. I want to welcome our witnesses. I want to welcome the family members and hope that you will introduce those who are here to cheer you on. I want to start our hearing just to express my thanks to Senator Capito and to Adam and the folks who work with you, to Mary Frances and John Kane and others who are part of our water team on the Democratic side. This committee, I like to describe this committee as we're workhorses, not show horses. And I think we showed that in spades a couple of weeks ago on the floor of the United States Senate, to be able to report out the first major infrastructure legislation or water bill on an 89-2 vote was a source of great pride. I can't tell you how many people have said to me, and I'm sure they have to you, Senator Capito, how many of our colleagues have said it was like the Senate of old. It was like, people got to offer their amendments, but they also had the opportunity to share their amendments with us, and we could make them part of a manager's amendment. We had a real debate on amendments. We voted up or down, and at the end of the day, we had just a wonderful vote. Got a very strong endorsement letter out of the administration. So I explained to some of my colleagues and my wife when I got home that night. I said, it's one of my happiest weeks in the U.S. Senate in 20 years. I'm just very, very proud of the work that we did. And we're working still on our next step, and that is service transportation, and hope that we can come through that with as equally a good outcome. But so I just want to say thanks to everybody who's been a part of that. It's special thanks to Senators Duckworth, Senator Cardin, Senator Inhofe, Senator Hummus. I say Hummus.
Hummus is Lummus, yeah.
Cynthia, forgive me. Lummus. That's a great name. Well, they're both great names. But thank you for your good work and the work of your staff. So. Anyway, happy to see this. One of them looks pretty familiar, and the other two, I really haven't had a chance to see, except maybe remotely. But we're pleased to welcome each of you outstanding nominees to fill critically important roles at the Environmental Protection Agency, and in one case within the Department of the Interior. Thank you for joining us today. We thank your family members for joining us today. And for those that might be joining us remotely, a big thank you to your family members who are willing to share you with all of us. Before getting to the particulars of our nominees, I want to take a moment to reflect on the issues that we as members of the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works and our constituents back home are wrestling with to make these roles so critically important for each of us and for each of our states. There isn't one of us who does not value the special natural spaces near our homes and in our states, including our national parks, including our wildlife refuges, from the First State National Historic Park to the Everglades and a lot of points east and west from there. These spaces support the fish, support the wildlife and quality of life that we take every opportunity to brag about. I know I brag about our national parks. I brag about our national wildlife refuges in our states, and I suspect that each of you do for your own. These spaces support the fish, the wildlife, the quality of life that we take, again, every opportunity to brag about. I think we have a moral obligation. I talk a lot about the moral obligation that we have to this planet that we have inherited, but we have an obligation to care for these spaces. We have an obligation to care for the habitats that they host and the varieties of species, including us, that they nurture. And of course, that requires skilled and committed leadership in places like the Department of Interior. We're thankful to Shannon Estenoz for offering that leadership. Water has played, as I said earlier, a significant role in each of our lives already this morning. I don't know about you, but we turned on the faucet at our home, brewed some coffee, took a shower, and with all the confidence that the water coming out of our spigots was clean, it was safe, whether because of lead or PFAS contaminants or other contaminants, or because they simply can't afford it. We took a large step last week, as I said earlier, toward addressing the concerns, the passage of our Drinking Water and Wastewater and Infrastructure Act, but there's a lot more still to do, as we know. I'm grateful that Radhika Fox is ready to help us tackle those challenges at EPA. And every day, millions of people across our country struggle with the threats posed by chemicals and pervade their homes, their workspaces, their water, their food, and household products. Whether it's from PFAS in their water, ethylene oxide in their neighborhoods, or formaldehyde in their wallboards, people are suffering. The American people need assurances that their products, their water, their food is safe for them and their families, and that's a prodigious responsibility. We're grateful that Michal Freedhoff is willing to serve in these critical positions. Michal, as some of you know, used to work with Eddie Markey, or actually I think he worked for her in the House for a long time, and maybe in the Senate as well. But we're just delighted that you have this opportunity to serve in a new capacity, and happy to welcome your daughters. They're sitting over your left shoulder. I'm always amazed at people like me, raising 4 kids, helping to raise 4 kids, working a really hard job here with all of us, and somehow making it all work. So thank you. To the girls, I want to say, those that are here and those that are watching remotely, thank you for sharing your mom with all of us. Shannon Estenoz brings 24 years of conservation experience to the job, including as the Department of Interior's Director of Everglades Restoration Initiatives and Executive Director of the South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Task Force. Her work prompted Eric Eichenberg, Everglades Foundation CEO, to say up for nomination. This is a quote of Eric. They're bringing on an extraordinary woman who is committed to the natural resources and environment of this country, close quote. Radhika Fox brings to her prospective role as head of the EPA Water Office a deep understanding of water policy and the importance of making clean water accessible to all Americans, regardless of their income or regardless of their zip codes. She's found success in working with people across the spectrum. She prompting, I think this is a quote from the Iowa Soybean Association, and I want to quote them. He said, Ms. Fox understands how water management issues are interwoven with the fabric of rural and urban communities, and that farmers must be part of the team and beneficiaries of this work. This integration is key for making real and long-lasting progress on protecting and improving water in the 21st century, close quote. And again, that was a quote from the Iowa Soybean Association. And last but certainly not least, Michal, someone well known to us at EPA. And I've already spoken about her, and rather than embarrass her further, I think we'll just cut to the chase, and let me just say that we're lucky to have someone who has her profound understanding of chemicals oversight, and management policy. During her time when she was working with Senator Markey, who was kind enough to let her come to work with us on the committee. She's played a key role in helping convert a highly divisive bill to reform the Toxic Substance Control Act, better known as TSCA, into a package that gained broad bipartisan support throughout the Congress. It was initially championed by Frank Lautenberg, as I recall, and later by Tom Udall and by David Vitter, in an unlikely partnership, but one that was successful, and Michal deserves a lot of credit for getting us to the finish line. And that kind of knowledge-based, thoughtful, and inclusive engagement that we so sorely need as head of the Chemical Safety Office at EPA. And I think our country will be well served to have Michal in that leadership role at EPA. So I want to thank all of you again for your willingness to share your wisdom, your expertise, your inclusive instincts with our nation. With that, I'm happy to recognize the ranking member, Senator Capito, for her opening statement. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's nice to be here with you after our win on the water bill on the floor. I add my voice of congratulations to you and your leadership team and your staff, and our staff's worked great together. And somebody asked me, like, how did you do that? And I said, well, we listened to our committee and we listened to our witnesses, and we wrote a bill that tried to accommodate as much as we could the varying views. And so I think in a place where there's a lot of talking, maybe listening is the better key to getting things done. So you're a great listener, and I appreciate being a part of your committee. So thank you for that.
What did you say?
What'd you say? Yeah. I also do want to thank the staff because, as you know,
Sometimes my wife says, excuse me, she says, you just don't listen enough. So I'm going to tell her what you said. Thank you.
I can't help you with that. But I can say, I look out over here and I see 3 very talented women, and I'm very proud of the fact that, and with your beautiful daughters here, we get to see more and more women taking the helm of the leadership positions in the highest levels of our government. So congratulations to the president for nominating 3 strong women and having them in front of our committee today. We're going to look at another core function of our committee. Not only and then I want to add a caveat that we're working hard to do the same thing with surface transportation that we were able to do with water. It's a heavier lift, we're finding, but we're working hard together to reach that point at which we can bring something to not just our committee, but to the full Senate as well. So we're gathering today to do the consideration and oversight of the president's nominees. And you all have a wealth of experience in your respective fields, and the chairman went over that. Unlike unlike the past nominees who have appeared before us this year, all three of the nominees today are already in place at the agencies on which you're nominated to serve. Put in another way, you've already been beginning to execute President Biden's agenda. Ms. Estenoz, Ms. Fox, and Dr. Freedhoff, I hope I didn't butcher anybody there. Thank you for your willingness to serve and for appearing before us today. Given your perspective from now being inside the administration, I especially look forward to hearing about the policies that you're currently working on. I'm interested to know what roles you have played in the decisions that the Biden administration has made to this point. I also want to understand which new or different directions you would push the administration being a Senate confirmed role, and what additional authorities you believe that additional layer of accountability will allow you to bring. That insider perspective will be very helpful to us. From the outside, the pace of executive action has seemed to occur at warp speed and without a lot of external engagement, especially from many of us in Congress. As National Public Radio reported, President Biden issued more orders in his first 100 days than any president since Harry Truman. NPR observed that Biden, quote, may have campaigned on bringing bipartisanship to Washington, but much of his early focus, at least, is on policies that he can implement on his own, end quote. That's the NPR quote. Many of President Biden's key actions and reversals have come in the environment and energy policy area. I understand that we should expect a new administration of the opposite party to have different positions than its predecessor. However, the pace of these changes and the unilateral nature concern me. Dramatic changes in regulations without adequate thought or input can hurt people, businesses, and local communities. That is particularly true during this economic recovery that we are facing. Of particular concern to me and this committee are issues like the Biden administration's decision to revisit Navigable Waters Protection Rule, and we will be talking about that, the streamlined NEPA Act, and the recent Migratory Bird Treaty Rule, the last for which a proposal was just released last week. That said, some of the activities we've seen so far at the Department of Interior and EPA, I do agree with and wholeheartedly support. Just last week, I participated in the sign unveiling for America's newest national park, really source of pride for me, the New River Gorge National Park and Preserve. It is already bringing that economic opportunity and excitement to my home state, and I cannot overstate how excited folks are, and I am too. Its administration will come under your oversight if confirmed. In the activities at EPA, I was pleased to see that the administration is prioritizing research on PFAS in its budget proposal. And I'm also glad that EPA is moving forward with a primary drinking water regulation for PFAS and PFOA. If confirmed in the Office of Water, Ms. Fox will take the lead on that, and we already talked about that on our Zoom call. Dr. Freedhoff, I know you have a wealth of experience, and I believe we've actually been in the same room talking about PFAS together in your former role, dealing with PFAS and other bioaccumulative chemicals for your years of service, including to our chairman, Chairman Carper. I look forward to hearing how the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention also plans to address PFAS. I hope we can use this hearing to discuss both my points of concern and, equally important, our areas of agreement. Thank you, Chairman Carper, for holding today's hearing, and I turn it back to you.
Thanks so much, Sue. When you said the words on New River Gorge, it brought a smile to my face. As a little boy, I learned to fish there with my dad and my grandfather. What a beautiful place. All right, thanks, Senator Capito. Now, I want to introduce our nominees. I think Senator Markey is going to help me a little bit with one of them. But first, Shannon Estenoz, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife and Parks for the Department of Interior. Before that, Shannon served as Chief Operating Officer and Vice President of Policy for the Everglades Foundation. She's also served as the U.S. Department of the Interior's Directors of Everglades Restoration Initiatives and Executive Director of the South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Task Force. Her previous professional roles also included Executive Director of the Environmental and Land Use Law Center, and Everglades Program Director of the World Wildlife Fund, Suncoast Regional Director of the National Parks Conservation Association, and 3 terms as the National Co-Chair of the Everglades Coalition. Shannon's public service includes appointments to Florida's Governor Lawton Charles, with whom I had the privilege of serving as governor. His commission, Lawton's commission for Sustainable South Florida. Governor Jeb Bush commissioned for the Everglades. The governing board of the South Florida Water Management District and Water Resources Advisory Commission, and the Broward Water Resources Task Force. That's a pretty impressive list, and we welcome you here today. I'm going to ask you to go ahead and share your testimony with us, and then I'll introduce Ms. Fox. Go ahead, please. Thank you, Shannon. And just turn on your mic.
Thank you, Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the Environment and Public...
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Markey.
Would
you like to go ahead and say a few words?
Would it be possible
about
for me, please,
Sure.
to introduce...
I was going to do them in seriatim, but why don't you please go ahead and introduce
No, thank you. No, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I'd like to begin just by saying that I know that your wife, Martha, thinks of you as a show horse. Okay, so that, well, here you're a workhorse, but back in Delaware, you are the show horse.
His wife and my wife are very good friends. They know us too well.
So I thank you, Chairman Copper and Ranking Member Capito, for the opportunity to introduce Michal Freedhoff before the committee today. And it is wonderful that 2 of her 4 children are here with us, the twins, her oldest daughters, Zahava and Rena. By nominating Dr. Freedhoff to serve as the EPA Assistant Administrator for Chemical Safety and Pollution Protection, President Biden is tapping an incredible scientific mind, a tenacious fighter for the public interest, and a brilliant policymaker who has made a career out of bipartisan solutions. With all due respect to Senator Inhofe of Oklahoma, with whom we disagree on climate issues. I have to give credit where credit is due, because it was Dr. Freedhoff working with Senator Inhofe's staff who got us to work together and pass numerous pieces of bipartisan legislation on brownfields, on chemical safety, in the interest of consumers and our communities. In my opinion, there is truly no better candidate than Michal Freedhoff for this very important job. Dr. Freedhoff began her career in Congress in 1996 as a science fellow in my office in the House of Representatives. I couldn't have been too bad of a boss, because it began an incredible 20-plus years of work in Congress, including more than a decade of working with me in the House and the Senate from 1996 all the way up until 2017. Congressional staffers and scientists reach a point in their careers where they have to pick whether to know a little about a lot or a lot about a little. Michal is the rare blend of the two who knows a lot about a lot of things. She truly is a congressional expert. From her successful work strengthening fuel economy standards and ensuring DOE whistleblower protections, to raising the alarm about chemical dispersants used during the BP oil spill, to investigating nuclear safety, she has used her keen intelligence and scientific training as a chemist to draft and pass the best policy. She also got me to sing about chemical safety and security in the Energy and Commerce Committee dais to the tune of "What a Wonderful World It Would Be." Yes, she got gas chlorine to rhyme with water clean. So her talents truly know no limits. She really does know how to get things done. Michal was absolutely instrumental to our bipartisan work in strengthening the Toxic Substances Control Act. She can tell you what almost every chemical abbreviation stands for, as well as what it would stand to do to our communities. For Dr. Freedhoff, the periodic table of elements is her alphabet. She fought for firefighters, for workers, for children's health, and for strong standards that provide certainty to businesses. During these negotiations, she worked to ensure EPA had enough funding from industry fees to assess and regulate chemicals, and that industry had deadlines for compliance with EPA regulations. She pushed so that regulations on the most dangerous chemicals are finished more quickly, and that if chemicals are found to be unsafe for groups like pregnant women, children, or workers, that EPA has to write regulations to protect those more vulnerable communities. She recognized that it is bipartisan commitment, married with consensus and give and take, that yield important, long-lasting legislation. She is now in a position to help implement that historic legislation, and our communities and families will be the healthier for it. I saw back in 1996 that there was a tremendous intellect and spirit in Michal, and that excellence has only continued. For 20 years, she has served the public and Congress, making policy stronger and smarter at every turn. I urge the committee to approve her nomination as EPA Assistant Administrator for Chemical Safety and Pollution Protection. She served us well as Minority Director of Oversight on this committee, and now the whole nation can benefit from her leadership, building the strongest possible protections against dangerous chemicals in our environment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm Tom Carper, and I approve that message. I won't try to match it, Michal. All right, that was beautiful. We won't ask you to sing, but we're delighted that you're able to introduce Michal to all of us. I'm going to move next to Radhika Fox, and I'll just introduce you, and then we'll come back and ask you to give your comments. Ms. Fox currently serves as EPA Principal Deputy Assistant Administrator for Water, and in that role, she is the Acting Assistant Administrator for Water. Ms. Fox has more than 20 years of experience in developing policies, programs, and issues-based advocacy campaigns. She previously was the CEO of the U.S. Water Alliance. She has also led the Value of Water Coalition, a program administered by the alliance that has spearheaded the popular Imagine a Day Without Water advocacy campaign. Prior to joining the U.S. Water Alliance, Ms. Fox directed policy and governmental affairs for San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, where my wife and I were last weekend for Mother's Day. Ms. Fox holds a BA from Columbia University and a master's in city and regional planning from the University of California at Berkeley, where she has a HUD community development, where she was a HUD community development fellow. And finally, I'm not going to attempt to match Senator Markey's comments with respect to Michal Freedhoff, but I think you can sense we know her and we love her, and we're pleased that she has this opportunity. I think it's really great that a law, I'll say this to your daughters, a law that your mom was very much involved in writing, she now has the opportunity to implement for our country and continue to do very good work with us. So that's something of value. So with that having been said, I think I'll come back to you, Ms. Estenoz, for your statement. Thank you and welcome. Feel free to introduce anyone who's joined us today in person or remotely if you'd like to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the Environment and Public Works Committee. It is an honor to appear before you as President Biden's nominee to be Assistant Secretary of the Interior for Fish and Wildlife and Parks, and I'm very honored to be on this panel with these distinguished nominees from EPA. I want to say hello to my husband, Richard, our sons, Nick and Spencer, my mom, my friends, my family who are all watching this morning. I am a fifth
Where are they?
They are all over. I have folks in Pittsburgh, Arizona, Tennessee, Florida, everywhere. So
right.
I want to say hi to everyone.
Good.
Thank you. I am a fifth-generation Floridian, born like all of my grandparents in Key West. We call ourselves conchs, after the beautiful mollusk once plentiful in the Florida Keys. My father was a civil engineer, and for the first 10 years of my life, his career took us to oil platforms off the coast of Louisiana, the Tennessee Valley Authority in Knoxville, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Kansas City. Before my father passed away in 1979, we returned to Key West, where his last job was as an engineer for Monroe County, where he worked to replace the old 7-mile bridge perhaps the most famous section of the Overseas Highway. To grow up in Key West is to grow up on the water, swimming, fishing, snorkeling, boating. And whether you know it or not, the water and its wildlife shape you. One of my earliest memories on the boat with my grandfather fishing was the day he caught me setting free the bait fish in his live well. He didn't scold me because he knew there is no conflict between harvesting fish and wanting to protect them. Because when your family has been in a place for many generations, there's an instinct to conserve that has nothing to do with science or regulations. It has to do with a connection to place and to a way of life. My own career path includes many echoes of my father's. I too pursued civil engineering. As a student, I returned to Eastern Tennessee to intern at Eastman Chemical Company. And of course, I dedicated 24 years of my career to an infrastructure modernization program led by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to restore the Everglades. I guess I never lost my childhood instinct to help fish and birds and mammals and people by helping to restore the land and ecosystem that sustain them all. My father was a bridge builder, and as part of my work on Everglades restoration, I was proud to play a part in building new bridges across the Everglades, and today water flows under those bridges into Everglades National Park. So I know that jobs, infrastructure, conservation, and restoration can and should go hand in hand. My work in the Everglades was ideal training for the role of Assistant Secretary for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I spent more than 2 decades in the trenches of collaborative conservation, land and ecosystem restoration, species recovery, water management, invasive species response, and national park stewardship. I spent 7 years at the Department of the Interior as its Director of Everglades Restoration, reporting directly to the position to which I have been nominated. I was a colleague and leader of the dedicated career staff in both bureaus that this Assistant Secretary manages. As a state official, I've been a customer of the Fish and Wildlife Service's regulatory programs, so I know firsthand what it's like to be a state trying to work with the federal government. As a stakeholder, I participated in the government's efforts to engage the public, and I have put in the hard work that it takes to build consensus and coalitions to get things done. I've been in my current role at Interior for 112 days, and every day I learn more about the fish and wildlife and parks issues facing your states and the nation. If I am confirmed, I will draw on my long state and federal experience as I work on issues such as water management and predator recovery in the West, protecting resources central to the cultural and economic well-being of tribes, combating invasive species, and collaborating on conservation of the sagebrush ecosystem. The National Park Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service play crucial roles in the challenges before us, recovering species and conserving habitat, supporting recreation and restoration jobs on public lands, and stewarding our most treasured landscapes and imperiled species through threats like wildfire and drought that are intensifying as a result of climate change. The Fish and Wildlife Service is on the front lines of wildlife disease, including preventing those diseases from spreading to humans. And the Park Service will play a key role in recommitting to our government-to-government relationship with tribal nations and telling the stories of all Americans. If I am confirmed, I will bring with me the tools that have served me best in my career: communication, transparency, and intellectual honesty. I will approach this role with a passion for collaboration and meeting big challenges in partnership. I look forward to celebrating together the results that we achieve together. I hope that today will be the first of many conversations with this committee. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Did you say your mom was watching today?
My mother is watching today, yes.
And your dad passed away a number of years ago.
He did when I was 11.
I'm sure they're very proud of you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, and thank you very much for that statement. The position that you've been nominated for was held most recently by Rob Wallace.
Yes,
who was a good friend of many of us, and a good friend of John Brasso's as well. I'll never forget at his confirmation hearing, he said these words. He talked about the bipartisan nature of this committee, the way that we work together, whether it's water, service, transportation, or other issues. And he said these words. He said, bipartisan solutions are lasting solutions. That's what he said, bipartisan solutions are lasting solutions. I have quoted him a million times. Thank God I haven't had to pay him for the times I've quoted him, but that's the spirit that really underlies much of what we do here. So thank you. Next is Radhika Fox. Love that name, Radhika Fox. And Ms. Fox, you're welcome to begin when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee. I am humbled to be nominated by President Biden and honored to be considered by this esteemed committee for the position of Assistant Administrator for Water at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I'm excited to engage with you today to hear about your water priorities and discuss how the Office of Water can support the communities that you so proudly represent. I want to acknowledge the family that's here with me today, my husband Jamie and my dad, Dr. K, as his patients call him, my brother Raghu and his wife Katie, and my kids Anjali and Krishna wanted to be here, but I said no skipping school. So my family is the American dream at work. I'm a first-generation American. My father and my mother grew up in rural India. My grandparents provided for their families as small farmers growing rice, lemons, and bananas. They relied on wells for their drinking water and pit latrines for their wastewater management. Everything I have accomplished is because I stand on the shoulders of my parents' hard work, and thank you for that, Dad. Today, I sit before you as the first woman of color, the first person of Asian American descent to be nominated to lead the EPA's Office of Water. Only in America could that happen in one generation. If confirmed, it would be my honor to serve the country where my parents' homes and hopes and dreams took root and flourished. Senators, as you all know, water is the world's most precious resource. However, our nation's water systems are often invisible to most. The vast majority of Americans turn on the tap and safe water flows out. Used water goes down the drain and is treated before it's safely returned to the environment. Most people just don't think about the environmental policies, the funding and financing programs, the work of local water utilities, and the key role of states and tribes in providing these essential water services. It just works for most Americans, but not for all. During the Flint water crisis, Time magazine told the story of 2-year-old Sincere Smith, featured on the cover with a full body rash from bathing in the water. What Sincere and his family experienced should not be experienced by any child or any parent in this country. And that is really what brings me to this work. If confirmed, I will dedicate myself to ensuring that all people, regardless of their income, their zip code, or the color of their skin, will have access to clean and safe water. Prior to joining the EPA, I served as the CEO of the U.S. Water Alliance, where I championed consensus-based progress on complex water issues. I worked with water leaders all across the country, from rural hamlets to urban enclaves, from America's heartland to both coasts. I also worked at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, the public water agency that provides drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, and municipal power to 2.7 million people in the Bay Area. There, I learned what it takes to comply with the range of regulations promulgated by the Office of Water, and I also built practical knowledge on how to manage water systems, whether it's capital and budget planning, infrastructure project delivery, planning for drought and diversifying of water supplies, and managing through crises like wildfires. Throughout my career, I have been guided by one foundational principle: listen to all sides in order to find enduring solutions. If confirmed, I will manage the Office of Water in a manner that is grounded in the wisdom, the voice, and the lived experience of those who are impacted by our decisions. We can't make policy sitting behind a desk in Washington, D.C. We have to actively engage with all those who are impacted by our decisions, whether it's water utilities, farmers and ranchers, community organizations, environmental groups, states, tribes, local officials, and many, many others. I truly believe, Senators, that water is the great uniter. It can unite this country. It can help pull us out of the compounding crises that face our nation, whether it's a global pandemic, economic recession, longstanding racial inequities, and climate change. Water brings us together across society and across the aisle. If confirmed, it would be my honor to work with Administrator Regan and all of you to advance durable water solutions. I look forward to your questions, and thank you so much for your time.
Thanks again. Would you just ask your dad to raise his hand? All right, thank you so much. And who is that other fellow sitting next to him? It's not your husband. My staff tried to convince me he's your brother, but that's your husband, isn't it? All right. Our thanks to both of you for willing to share your daughter and your wife with all of us. Nice to see you both. All right, Dr. Freedhoff, please.
Good morning, Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, Senator Inhofe, and other members of the committee. It's an honor to be here today, though I'll admit it's kind of strange to be sitting on this side of the dais. I'm fortunate to have what I think of as 3 honorary home state senators on this committee. Senator Cardin from my adopted home state of Maryland, Senator Markey, my first Capitol Hill boss, and for whom I worked for more than 15 years, and Chairman Carper, who gave me the opportunity to work on this committee staff for the last 4 years. Okay, you too. I'm joined here today by my daughters, Sahaba and Rena Van Leeuwen, who hopefully are not playing on their phones. Watching from home are my husband, Michael, my son, Sammy, and my daughter, Vivian. My late mother, Helen Freedhoff, and my 85-year-old father, Stephen, who is stuck behind a closed border in Canada, would have been here if they could have been. I moved to Washington the day after I defended my PhD in chemistry. Although I didn't even have a job lined up, I was drawn to working in government, knowing that I could use my scientific background to make a difference in people's lives. And during my time on Capitol Hill, I was remarkably fortunate to have had the rare opportunity to work with so many of you and your staffs to rewrite the Toxic Substances Control Act. And I certainly never imagined that I'd have this once-in-a-lifetime honor to be President Biden's nominee to lead the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention at EPA and implement the law that we all worked so hard on. During my more than 2 decades working for the legislative branch, I believe I earned a reputation for being fair, approachable, substantive, and able to craft provisions and consensus by bringing people with disparate viewpoints together. Many provisions of this committee's unanimously supported PFAS legislation demonstrate the way I approach the legislative process. And some of these measures, like adding almost 200 PFAS to the toxics release inventory that Senators Capito, Gillibrand, and Carper co-authored, actually fall within the office that I would manage if confirmed. It's that spirit of collaboration that I would bring to this new role. I believe that we can and we must fulfill EPA's mission of protecting human health and the environment in a manner that includes input provided by a diverse set of stakeholders. And that applies to ensuring chemical safety under TSCA, to providing safe, effective tools for farmers to protect our food supply under FIFRA, and to working to incentivize more sustainable practices and products in our pollution prevention programs. If confirmed, one of the responsibilities that I most look forward to is implementing the Frank-Lautenberg Chemical Safety for the 21st Century Act, TSCA. I consider that work to be a highlight of my career. And some combination of the complexity of the subject matter, the intense debate surrounding some of the issues, and the shared legislative battle scars made the bipartisan team of staff who spent months together as we worked to get it done among my most trusted colleagues and friends, today still. We took the time needed to understand each other's perspectives and made important compromises as we negotiated difficult and sometimes very divisive provisions of the bill, and that hard work produced a law that was supported almost unanimously. I want to provide my assurance that if confirmed, I will ensure that our activities are conducted transparently, using the best available science, and informed by EPA's expert career staff. While you may not ultimately agree with every decision that I make, I can commit to you that if confirmed, all our decisions will be well documented, transparently made, and will seek and incorporate input from all stakeholders. Finally, while I've worked closely with EPA staff for years, I've developed newfound appreciation for their dedication, talent, and resilience since arriving at the agency a few months ago. I'm looking forward to working with the scientific, legal, and policy staff to implement America's chemical safety and pesticide safety programs. And if confirmed, I'm confident that with their partnership, we can move TSCA implementation forward in a manner that honors the late Senator Lautenberg's legacy and lives up to Congress's expectations that EPA uses its new authority to protect Americans against the risks of unsafe chemicals. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
And thank you very much for that statement, Michal. Before I turn to Senator Capito for the first round of questions, I need to, this is something we do at each of our hearings with witnesses who've been nominated, and I ask you 3 questions. And after I ask a question, we'll just go down the line. You can say yes or no. I would urge a yes vote, response, but it's up to you. First question, do you agree, if confirmed, to appear before this committee or designated members of this committee and other appropriate members of the Congress, and to provide information subject to appropriate and necessary security protections with respect to your responsibilities? Do you, Ms. Estenoz?
Yes.
Ms.
Yes.
Fox? Dr. Freedhoff?
Yes.
Thank you. Second question, so far so good. Second question, do you agree to ensure that testimony, briefings, documents, and electronic and other forms of communication of information are provided to this committee and its staff and other appropriate committees in a timely manner? Do you?
Yes.
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 Thank you. One last. Do you know of any matters which you may or may not have disclosed that may place you in a conflict of interest if you are confirmed? Do you?
No.
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 Good, thank you. Senator Capito. We're going to have 2 5-minute rounds in terms of questions, but she needs to be in 2 places at one time right now in the Commerce Committee, so thank you very much for being here.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the privilege of going first. I apologize. After I question, I'm going to have to go over to Commerce. We're working on the Endless Frontiers Act, which is endless. It's a good way of putting it. So I'm going to start with you, Ms. Fox. We talked about this issue on waters of the U.S., and you've all pledged clarity and thoughtfulness and regulatory certainty. Administrator Regan committed to not going back to the verbatim reading of the 2015 Obama Waters of the U.S. rule. This is a very far-reaching rule that impacts a lot of people, a lot of agriculture as well. But he hasn't provided much detail on this. So I'm wondering, in your opinion, do you believe that the 2015 rule was overreaching? What would your plans be to ensure we do not return to that overreaching definition, which I obviously believe that it was? And also, do you agree or disagree with the court decision, including the injunctions against the rule that were issued in 2015?
Thank you, Senator Capito, for the question, and also thank you for the opportunity to visit with you recently on so many of the issues before the Office of Water. And I really look forward to accomplishing great things with you and your office if confirmed. So on the question of waters of the U.S., this is, of course, one of the most foundational components of the work before the Office of Water because it sets the foundation for how we protect our lakes, our rivers, our oceans, our wetlands. We are in the process of reviewing the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, and really under Administrator Regan's direction, we're really trying to understand what are the lessons learned from an implementation perspective on both the 2015 rule and the 2020 rule. You asked about how we're going to approach that review and that consideration, and it will really be, as Administrator Regan has said, to listen to all sides, to understand what is working, what is not working from an implementation perspective, from the agricultural community, from industry, from environmental organizations, as well as our co-regulators, the states and tribes. Based on that feedback and really based on the science and the economic analysis, we'll make a determination moving forward. But what I can say, Senator Capito, is that Administrator Regan and I want an enduring definition of waters of the U.S., one that can withstand administration changes, can protect our waters, and ensure the economic vitality of all communities. So that is our commitment as we do this review.
Yeah, I would implore you again, as I think a lot of folks who opposed the direction that the Obama administration went, that we don't go down that path again. Obviously, the courts agreed with that presumption and caused a lot of confusion at the same time. Ms. Estenoz, I wanted to ask you about NEPA. Just recently, Secretary Haaland signed a secretarial orders that directed the DOI to ignore and to not follow the common sense reforms to the implementation of NEPA. We hear about this from everybody in terms of how long it takes to get things approved, how long the process is, how lengthy and expensive it is, and we still are having issues. So did you play any role in advising the Secretary in the NEPA implementation decision? And are there elements of the Trump administration's NEPA reforms that you could support?
Thank
So
you.
the first question is, did you play any role in them?
Thank you, Senator Capito. I was not directly involved in the development of the NEPA recommendations, but as part of the DOI leadership team during these first 112 days, I paid close attention. Obviously, the two bureaus that I've been managing, this is a very important issue for them. I think the Secretary's goal here is to make sure that our environmental reviews are thorough, but also timely and efficient. And I think it's very important that that balance be struck. We are reviewing the procedures and policies the previous administration had in place, and the elements of it that work, I fully expect that we will continue those and refine those that need to be refined to achieve the right balance between thoroughness and timeliness. In my career, I have been on all sides of NEPA, so I've been a customer of waiting for a NEPA to be finished, and then I've been involved in the development of them. So I'm sensitive to how long those analyses can take. But again, I think it's finding that right balance between making sure that they're thorough. It's an important bedrock of the way that government implements programs and projects, and then doing it in a way that's efficient and transparent and accessible to those to the public and to sort of our customer base for projects and programs.
As we look to the big surface transportation bill that we're working on, this is obviously a critical aspect of this, and I would encourage you to take that practical experience that you bring in terms of length and time without skirting any environmental regulations into consideration. And just lastly, I would ask you...
You're welcome to spend. You don't have to take another.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. The new national park in West Virginia, since you'll have oversight over oversight over the National Guards, I just wanted to get our national parks get a reassurance. Number one, that you would come and visit our brand new where he learned to fish with his father and grandfather, and a really special place. So a commitment that new park will be able to get the infrastructure that's needed with the increased visitorship that we're already seeing.
Senator, let me say that my husband, and our two, at the time, very young children spent a magical summer vacation at New River Gorge, one of the most magnificent places in our country. And for a Florida girl, where we measure topography in inches, it was really a staggering and profoundly impactful experience for me. It is really one of my favorite places. And so you can count on me if I am confirmed to make sure that the National Park Service has what they need to make the most of that. And I want to congratulate you and Senator Manchin on that.
Well, we'll have to clip that and put that out around the country. That's a great advertisement for a beautiful spot.
Yes.
So last question, Dr. Freedhoff, on the PFAS issue. You know that this is something that I'm deeply committed to, and you mentioned in your opening statement. Do you feel like there is a scientific gap between the tools that EPA needs to decide whether or not to regulate? I mean, it seems like it's taken so long in some ways. Is that because there's a gap in tools and a gap of certifiable data that can be used to move forward?
Thanks very much for that question, Senator. I know how important the issue is to you and to so many members of the committee as well. And I know that there is sometimes a disconnect between the urgency that people expect the agency to be able to act with and the urgency that we actually act on. And part of the reason for that are the research gaps that you're talking about. You know, one of the provisions that was in this committee's PFAS legislation was language directing EPA's Office of Research and Development to come up with a way to prioritize PFAS so that the agency will be able to focus its research and monitoring efforts a little bit more strategically. And in my office, if I'm confirmed, there's a few different efforts that we've been working on that will help complement that. So first is the toxic release inventory language that you co-authored, which will give us information about which PFAS are still being released into the environment. A second is a proposed rule that is at OMB that will require manufacturers who made PFAS to tell us what they made, how much they made, and what it was used for. And that will give us a snapshot of what's in commerce, and that will also be able to inform our research efforts and monitoring and regulatory efforts as well. And then finally, just a couple of weeks ago, we announced a policy that is designed to prevent unsafe new PFAS from entering commerce, and that'll prevent future problems that will cause us to play catch up again as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Got to run.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you later. A question let me start my questioning, if I could, with Ms. Fox. And Ms. Fox have confirmed, what will you do to make sure we have affordable, clean, and safe drinking and wastewater for all Americans?
Thank you, Senator Carper. I think first, I would make sure that the Office of Water is implementing the range of water infrastructure funding and financing programs that this committee has taken so much leadership on developing. I would also focus on strengthening and supporting the capacity of our states and our tribes because they are often the ones that are working with local communities and getting these resources delivered. I also think that we have an opportunity to do more on affordability. I know this is an issue that's very important to you and other members of the committee, that as we make these infrastructure investments, we have to do them in a way that makes them continue to be affordable both to individual families, but also that there's affordability at the utility scale. I think a third priority will really be around PFAS and emerging contaminants. And I think, as Michal just said, we have so much exciting work happening at the EPA right now. And I was really proud, actually, just a couple of weeks ago to be asked by Administrator Regan to co-chair a new PFAS Executive Council, and I think that is going to be important as we think about making sure our clean water that water is clean for all families.
All right, thank you. My second question is for Dr. Freedhoff. And Dr. Freedhoff, first of all, let me just say how I'm very pleased that you received support from former EPA administrators, both Democrat and Republican, who have led the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention before you. And I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from no less than 7 former directors or administrators of the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention, urging your confirmation. One area I'm not hearing any objection, so ordered. One area I'm really interested, and I suspect many of us are, hearing from you on is how EPA implements and plans to implement TSCA, Toxic Substance Control Act, to protect American workers. We've heard from environmental groups that they are unhappy with the way EPA assumed workers would always be wearing protective gear. And we've heard from companies that they are unhappy that EPA made unrealistic assumptions about risks to workers. And with that in mind, would you tell us how you think the worker safety concerns should be addressed?
Thanks very much for that question, Chairman. I've heard a lot from environmental organizations and industry as well. And as you know, the last administration finalized the first 10 risk evaluations under TSCA. And I think there was a lot of good work that went into those risk evaluations, but I think a lot of them were rushed as well. But I also know that the career scientists at EPA really moved heaven and earth to get them done. So I can't really speak to why those decisions were made, but I can tell you a little bit about how I see the issue of worker safety and how I would implement it if confirmed. So first of all, if our scientific risk evaluations find that a chemical burns your hand, but gloves solve that problem, then our chemical safety rule is just going to say you have to wear gloves. And same for OSHA. If the chemical safety risk evaluation finds that a risk that we identified can be solved by complying with OSHA regulations, then our rule is just going to say follow OSHA rules. So second thing I'd say is that industry clearly feels like it has a lot of information that the agency needs to make our decisions. And I've met with industry a number of times now, and I really just want to say that I welcome their input. And if they show us that something that they're currently doing to protect workers is enough to address the risk, then our rule is just going to say, keep on doing what you're doing. And the third thing I would say is that I think the agency could do a better job with risk communication. The law tells us that we have to look at potentially exposed and susceptible subpopulations, and of course that includes workers. But saying that a risk exists to workers in the absence of protections doesn't mean the protections are absent at chemical companies all over this country. And I think that we will do better in the future to provide context that is important for everyone to understand in the future.
My time has expired. How's that? Pretty well. Senator Inhofe, you're next. And according to my list here, Jim, Senator Whitehouse is going to be joining us next by WebEx. I see we've been joined by Senator Kramer. Senator Markey was here. He may come back, and my guess is he will. And then we're looking for Senator Kelly and Senator Padilla as well. So, Senator Inhofe.
Senator Cardin's on WebEx.
Senator Cardin on WebEx. Good. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question for each one of the witnesses, and I'm looking forward to this. I've had a chance to visit with some, and let's start off with you, Ms. Fox. The WOTUS rule that was in place prior to the last administration was one that we had a real concern with out in Oklahoma, and that was primarily that we had the idea that the state regulation of the water was working very well in our state of Oklahoma, and there is a fear that with the regulation coming from Washington, that even out, we're a pretty rare arid state. You get out in the panhandle of Oklahoma, it doesn't get a lot drier than that. And they were saying that they felt that under the federal rules that'd probably end up being a wetland and it'd be over-regulated. So I'd just like to know the specific on the rules that Trump replaced WOTUS with. What specific things about that do you find to be objectionable, if any?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think the example that you just shared from your home state of Oklahoma is exactly why, if confirmed, I would really manage the Office of Water in a way that really tried to understand the wisdom, the voice, and the lived practical experience of people in complying with our rules. I bring that orientation because I worked at a local water agency that had to comply with all of the things that Office of Water did. Yeah. And so, to your question specifically, as we have been conducting our review of both the 2015 rule and the 2020 rule, really at the direction of Administrator Regan, we have found implementation challenges with both of the rules. Just one example, for example, with the 2015 rule, there were a lot of case-specific determinations, jurisdictional determinations, and what we found from listening to folks in states is that was really cumbersome from an implementation perspective. That's what our career staff have heard. At the same time, I think the 2020 rule tried to correct for that. But now what we're hearing, our career staff are hearing from several states is now we have, the vast majority of waters in some of the states that are now not jurisdictional. And so it's raising a different kind of implementation challenge as far as water quality protection. And I think,
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I know that I've got to get around to all three of them.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate your comments, and particularly in your opening statement. I enjoyed that. And so I will look forward to working with you. And if you don't behave, I'm going to talk to your daddy. Okay? All right. That's good. Now, we want to real quickly go to Ms. Estenoz on the lesser prairie chicken. I know you're fully familiar with that. You and I had a chance to visit about that. But we're facing something right now that in a federal court in Texas throughout the threatened listing for the prairie chicken, the reason at that time they didn't think that the conservation efforts that were just really impressive were really considered at that time. Now, we're talking about 5 states who were involved in this thing, and you and I had a chance to talk about that. So I would just like to kind of get your input into how much weight are you going to attach to the efforts of conservation efforts of the 5 states in terms of your jurisdiction.
Senator Inhofe, thank you so much. Thank you for the time you spent with me talking about this and other issues. I very much appreciate it. We are under a court deadline to issue a 12-month finding near the end of the month. And what I would say is that the conservation efforts of states, private landowners, are central, really, to any hope that we have for recovering species before they're listed or whether they're listed or not, regardless of their conservation status. And so you gave me good counsel yesterday to reach out and learn more about those conservation efforts. I've already taken steps just in the last 24 hours to begin that dialogue, and I think that's really where the hope for the lesser prairie chicken lies, is in our collaborative efforts to recover that species.
Okay, that's good, and we'll be visiting with you, and I appreciate it very much. I have every reason to believe that you will take great consideration of the input that is out there.
Thank you, sir.
Then, last but not least,
Yeah, well, your time's expired, but go ahead if you just briefly. And we're going to have a second round.
Short here.
We have a second round as well.
I have a picture here I want everyone to look at. And I want you, my little girls here, Zahava and Rena, to listen to what I'm saying. Your mama probably is the only person in America that will have equal praise from Senator Markey and me. Okay? And I say that in all honesty because we've worked so well together. In fact, we shared some credit. I've often said I felt that I was more responsible for getting Barbara Boxer to come with us on the chemical legislation. And they all now are giving you that credit. So I'm not sure. I think we shared that credit at that time. And I have always enjoyed working with you, and certainly do. I'd like just to have just any comment you can make to update us as to what we're going to be doing with the prairie chicken. You know, and I both know all the background of that, and I'd like to see, where you think we're going to be on that issue.
And I'd ask you to be very brief, if you would, please.
I'm hoping that I don't have to talk about the prairie chicken for the entire 4 years that I spent in the Biden administration if I'm confirmed, so.
That was pretty brief, and that's to the point. I think she got her message across. That was lovely. I'm glad that you asked for the extra time. And we'll come back to you for a second round, Senator Inhofe.
We will.
Senator Cardin, I think, is now going to join us next by WebEx, followed by Senator Kramer, Senator Whitehouse by WebEx, Senator Lummis by WebEx, Senator Markey, Senator Kelly. I have to go join a Finance Committee hearing for a little bit, and Senator Kelly is good enough to take the gavel from me while I do that. And Senator Kelly, I think Ben Cardin is up next. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me thank all of our witnesses. I've had a chance to meet with each of you, and thank you very much for your public service. I would first ask unanimous consent to submit record letters of support for Ms. Fox to be Assistant Administrator for Water from 3 Maryland organizations: Waterkeepers Chesapeake, Moonshot Missions, and Southeasterners Rural Community Assistance Project. Without objection, since the chairman just stepped aside.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Ms. Estenoz, if I could, we had a wonderful conversation. I appreciate your knowledge and sensitivity to the wildlife refuges that are located in the state of Maryland, and your desire to fill critical positions, your knowledge of the national park system in our state of Maryland, and the request to expand the national park system, and your sensitivity to that, your understanding of the Chesapeake Bay and the importance it is to our entire region. I'm going to ask you a question that we did not have a chance to talk about during our meeting, but one that I think is critically important in the theme of the Biden administration on dealing with equity issues. One of the goals of the 2014 Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement is to expand public access to the bay and its tributaries through existing and new local, state, and federal parks, refuge, reserves, trails, and partner sites. So can you share with us how you would prioritize the accessibility of outdoor space and the equity issues in so many Americans today who would enjoy access but find it difficult, if not impossible, to gain access?
Senator, thank you so much. And again, thank you for the time that you and your team spent with me this week. I appreciated that so much. Expanding public access to nature and to public lands is a top priority for the administration, for the secretary, and if I am confirmed, it will be a top priority for me. We have spent a lot of time in the last 112 days talking about the programs that we have and that we can leverage, existing programs that we can leverage to increase public access. Our National Wildlife Refuge system is particularly promising in terms of its accessibility to underserved communities and the millions of Americans that live within a 60-minute drive, for example, to of a national wildlife refuge, and looking for opportunities to help those folks get out to our public lands. The other very big opportunity we have is in the LWCF program. On Monday, we just announced the Outdoor Recreation Legacy competitive grant program of $150 million. We're so grateful for the Congress's work to fully fund LWCF. That program is specifically designed to help underserved communities, rural communities, urban communities, increase their access to parks and open space. And it's one of the initiatives that I'm the most excited about. And if I am confirmed, it will be one of my top priorities.
Well, I look forward to working with you on those issues because I think it is an area that we can make significant progress and we get greater support for the programs of our national parks and our refuges and just conservation. Ms. Fox, I want to ask you one question. We had a chance also to talk about the resiliency and stabilization funds that were approved by the Senate and the affordability issue. And I want to just, if I might, talk about water affordability. It's extremely challenging for the ratepayers to have to deal with what is necessary for clean, safe drinking water. And Senator Wicker and I have put into the bill that was passed by the Senate a pilot program on water affordability that would be implemented by the EPA. It would be a new program for you all to implement. Can you just tell us your willingness to take on this responsibility if we get you the resources and authority?
Yes, thank you, Senator Cardin, for the question and for the opportunity to visit with you earlier this week. Absolutely. If confirmed, and water affordability would be a top priority for me. Senator Cardin, as we talked about earlier this week, I have a long track record of working on water affordability issues because I really view affordability as the flip side of the coin of making infrastructure investments. And what I saw working at a local water agency is we were always balancing affordability with the timing, phasing, and sequencing of our infrastructure projects. We would absolutely work at the EPA Office of Water to design and quickly implement the affordability pilot program that is in the water infrastructure bill that this committee led the development of. I would draw on my experience having helped communities around the country in the design of their water affordability programs. One of the things that I did when I was at the U.S. Water Alliance was to establish something called the Water Equity Network, working with over 20 cities around the country on these very issues. Finally, one of the things that we have just started over the last month at the Office of Water is a water affordability learning exchange. And what we're doing with that learning exchange is really creating an informal ad hoc mechanism for for our team, the career leadership in the Office of Water, to regularly engage with equity and environmental justice organizations who are working on affordability issues, the water associations that represent both rural and urban water utilities, to really find lots and lots of common ground on water affordability. So you would have my absolute commitment, Senator Cardin. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, for a point of clarification, in my haste to try to get everything done, I didn't get around to the real question I was going to talk to you about, Ms. Friedman, so I would do that for the record, okay?
Absolutely.
You bet.
Thank you.
Senator Kramer is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Thank you to all of the witnesses for being here. Ms. Estenoz, I'm from North Dakota, and we're a big prairie pothole state, coteaux and prairies everywhere. One of the reasons we have so many potholes and so many wetlands is because, unlike many of the other prairie pothole region states, our farmers didn't drain when everybody else was draining. Consequently, they've been punished for their good behavior on a regular basis by, I'm sure, well-intentioned bureaucrats over the years. One of there are a number of programs, but one of the programs that I've been the most frustrated with, and that would be under your jurisdiction should you be confirmed, of course, is the waterfall production areas. And those are the easements pre-1976 that fathers and grandfathers and grandparents signed in difficult times with unclear maps and not very good definitions. And I brought an example of what I think is has been a real abuse with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and I've been very frustrated. There's been some work done that's beneficial, like new mapping. It's been very delayed, but it's getting better. The old maps are like on a napkin or on an envelope, drawn with a pencil. I'm only exaggerating slightly. Of course, we have better technology today. But here's one of the frustrations that I want to point to in this map. And we've got copies for you as well in case you don't get a good view of this. But this is literally a picture of land that I visited last year with the Director of Fish and Wildlife Service. And this is an area that has a water production area easement on it. And one of the definitions for the easement from pre-1976, in some of the language of the grant of the easement, it says, quote, protects large bodies of surface water, including lakes and ponds. Now, I'm not a hydrologist, but I'm pretty sure I can see where the lakes and ponds are. Can you see where there are lakes and ponds on this? Yeah, those would be wetlands in the easement. Now, here's the frustration. I'm going to replace this picture with the map that came from the Fish and Wildlife Service identifying the wetlands for the easement, contemporary. To give you some, we're going to flip that up so that we can get it in the right direction. In the upper right-hand corner is that same large lake. And as you can see, it's not assessed any acres for the easement. Now, why would that be? Well, the reason for that is, in my view, is because there's a cap of acres for the easement, and whoever decided that wasn't a wetland decided that this 0.15 spot down there is a wetland. This dry spot of 0.14 acres is a wetland. This dry spot of 0.49 acres is a wetland. All added up so that the dry land can be considered water for the easement and not attribute any of the real water to the easement. This is called taking. This is called taking, and it's been legal theft, in my view, by the Fish and Wildlife Service. As I said, we've made some progress, at least in the mapping side, and we think we've made some progress on the administrative side through an appeals process. And so our farmers, our landowners have gotten their new maps, and not all of them are done yet, even though they were promised. This COVID thing happened, and a lot of people didn't work for a long time. But at the same time, their appeals have fallen on deaf ears. Not a single substantive appeal has been granted, not one, including this, especially one that got to the direct, not a single director's appeal. Now, I'm talking about the previous administration. I am hopeful that you, if confirmed, and the others, and the Fish and Wildlife Service Director, when that person's nominated and confirmed, will take the time to come out and hear frustrated farmers one more time, who I'll have to beg to get there because they have no faith that the government's going to look out for them. But this is what helps get to 12% conservation, folks. We haven't even talked about WOTUS. We'll do that later. But this is what gets to 12%. It's taking a bunch of dry land and calling it a wetland and ignoring the wetland. To get to 30, people would starve because there wouldn't be enough cropland left. We have got to take a realistic view of this. But more important than that, is the fact that farmers own this land. This is their land that's being taken. So I know I've been out of commission for a couple of weeks. I hope that you and I can get to know each other better, and I'd love to bring you up to speed on all of this and love to hear more.
Well, Senator, if I may, thank you for this, and I do look forward for us getting to know one another and for the opportunity to sort of dig into this issue. I do know, and I'm pleased to hear that you consider it to be a step in the right direction, that there's an appeals process. It appears to be something that is working for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and so I think that's good. I obviously need to dig deeper and fully understand the parameters of how we're delineating what is a wetland. And I have a lot of experience in wetlands, being where I'm from in South Florida. So it's an area of both the law and the science that I'm familiar with. And so I thank you for the images. This is very helpful. And if I'm confirmed, I pledge that I will be in close contact with you. And if I heard an invitation to come out to North Dakota, I would very much like to take you up on that.
But there's skating rinks in February, so we have to pick the time. It's very important when you come to North Dakota.
Yes. Thank you.
With that, Mr. Chairman, there was a letter written to the acting director from a number of organizations from North Dakota. If you haven't received it, we'll make sure you get it. And I would ask unanimous consent to place it into the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And joining via WebEx is Senator Whitehouse is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Kelly. First, let me welcome Ms. Estenoz, Ms. Fox, and Dr. Freedhoff. It is great to have you here in the committee with us, even if we're just here electronically. For Ms. Fox and Dr. Freedhoff, I want to ask about the problem of science in the last administration, which was routinely ignored and even disparaged. And that was done on a repeated, consistent, systematic basis. I think any notion that this was a coincidence or a fluke is living in a dream world. And I know that Administrator Regan has pledged to take a look at all of that disparagement and violation of science. And in the conversation that we had, it was clear to me that he was going to look at who and what and where and when, but not at why things went wrong. And I would encourage you, if you're confirmed, to make sure that you're answering the question why. Because if this was systematic, we need to know who was behind it. When January 6th happened, I pushed very hard on the Department of Justice to make sure they weren't just challenging the people who came through the windows and doors of the Capitol, but looking upstream to who might have been behind it, who might have been organizers, funders. And I think you need to have the same conversation with your employees. And my question to you is going to be one for the record, because I want you to have the chance to sit down and answer it, fully, and not under the pressure of my 5-minute limit. And that is, what's going to happen when people come forward to disclose things that were done wrong at EPA in the past? Are they going to be told, we're not interested, go away, we're looking forward, not backwards? Are they going to be told, we're not really interested, but why don't you go down to that overworked Inspector General? Maybe they'll take an interest there. Are they going to be told, look, this really damaged an important agency, we're taking this seriously, and here's our system for dealing with your concerns, here's who's going to hear you out. Here's how we're going to coordinate the different stories that we're hearing. Here is what our response plan is to the predicament that we've been left with. So I hope that you can all answer that, and I would appreciate it very much if you gave that some time and attention and answered it as a question for the record. Ms. Estenoz, welcome. I'm delighted that you are here. I hope that we can bring you up to Rhode Island to visit the park that is going in along the Blackstone River. It's a slightly unusual park because it's made up of lots of old historic mills and parts of the early Industrial Revolution, which were joined together for power by the Blackstone River. And now it's a very unusually, it doesn't have borders like a lot of parks. It's like jewels strung along the string of the Blackstone River. And I hope very much that you'll come and see it and help us turn that into the facility that it really should be. It's just gotten started. But I want to talk generally with you and put a flag up about the problem of waters and coasts being overlooked. I'm thrilled that you're from the Everglades. You know what a coast is. You know what salt water is. I think that's great. The Land and Water Conservation Fund, I have complained about for years for its upland bias. In fact, I'm filing legislation to rename it the Upland and Freshwater Conservation Fund, so that any pretense that it treats coasts and saltwater fairly is removed, and we can set up a Coasts and Saltwater Conservation Fund that can, I hope, stand on its own and have the resources that upland and freshwater gets. The Army Corps of Engineers has a flood program that is just horrible for coasts compared to what it does for upland and inland. And the Department of the Interior is named Interior, so it's not exactly a coastward-facing agency. So, you know, our coasts are seeing unprecedented hazards from sea level rise, from warming of the seas, from upheaval in the biota and the fisheries, and from really catastrophic storm risk. Rhode Island is right in the target area for that as a very coastal ocean state. So I just hope that as you go about your responsibilities, you will make sure that this long tradition of overlooking oceans and coasts gets whittled back. We even saw it in the Biden infrastructure plan, which is extremely weak on everything having to do with oceans and coasts. It's like there's a missing section on oceans and coasts. So I'm going to be a persistent nag, I guess, of the Interior Department to pay more attention to oceans and coasts. And I just wanted to lay the marker down right now. And if I have any time left, to ask you for a quick response.
Yes, Senator, I'm happy to respond to that. When you're born on an island, it's all coast. My husband and I have raised our family in Broward County, Florida, which regularly experiences now several times a year what we call sunny day flooding, which is essentially just the ocean coming and occupying our streets. So the amount of work that needs to be done to build coastal resilience is really, and from an Interior Department, the equities that we have on the coast are incredibly significant. And so if I am confirmed, coastal restoration, coastal resilience, these will be high priorities for me and in terms of the Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Park Service. And I look forward to visiting Rhode Island.
We'll be in touch a lot, and I welcome you and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And now joining us also via WebEx is Senator Lummis is recognized for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Estenoz, you have an impressive career. It's very nice to meet you by Zoom. You are, I take note of a statement in your testimony where you said, as a state official, I was a customer of Fish and Wildlife Service regulatory programs and know firsthand what it is like to be in the shoes of states trying to work with the federal government. In your view, what is the role of states in the context of the Endangered Species Act?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for that question. I think the states play an absolutely central role when it comes to the Endangered Species Act, particularly when it comes to species recovery and management. And what we want is to recover species. We want species not to need the protection of the Endangered Species Act. And states, states have a tremendous amount of expertise on the ground in species management. And so it has been my experience in my own career that when in the almost 25 years I was working in Florida, the state of Florida was our strongest partner, and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, a tremendous partner there. So I believe very strongly in partnerships with states and really leveraging the expertise that we have in states.
Well, I'm delighted to hear you say that, because one of the great success stories of the Endangered Species Act since it was enacted is grizzly bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and the Trump administrations all agreed that the greater Yellowstone ecosystem grizzly bear population has recovered and should be delisted. So, Ms. Estenoz, do you believe we should keep species on the list that every scientist in the past 3 administrations agrees has been, should be delisted, has recovered, and management handed back to the states?
Thank you, Senator. And I believe when species meet the definition of delisting or downlisting, then we should delist and downlist. The greater Yellowstone ecosystem grizzly population is doing very, very well. The grizzly is listed as an entire lower 48 population. But I want to say something specifically, if I may, about predator recovery in particular. Species recovery is always challenging, but I want to recognize that there are special challenges when it comes to predator recovery, and particularly for folks on the ground who find themselves sharing the landscape with a recovering predator species. And it's really important for folks to feel supported and listened to, and that we have the right tools in the toolbox to help folks live and exist with a recovering predator species. And state management is, and state expertise, as I said before, is absolutely central to this approach. And if I'm confirmed, I will prioritize understanding and working closely with states to recover all species, and in particular predators.
Well, thanks so very much. I'm going to shift over to Ms. Freedhoff, but if I get a chance, I'll come back to you. My question is about chemicals make benefits and marvels of modern life possible. According to the Department of Energy, more than 96% of all manufactured goods rely on chemicals. And one of the duties of the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention is to weigh the benefits and risks associated with chemicals. So how do you intend to weigh those two things, both the benefits and the risks of chemicals before your office?
Thanks very much for that question, Senator. And you're absolutely right. Both of the laws that serve as the primary authority for the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention require the EPA to consider costs and benefits and risks. And for example, in TSCA, Congress actually gave EPA the authority to exempt uses of chemicals if that use is needed for an economically significant reason from our rules. And if confirmed, I intend to follow the law.
Well, thank you. And hopefully I'll get a chance in round 2 to visit with you again. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. And is Senator Markey here via WebEx? Well, recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Fox, I want to get your thoughts on the waters of the United States, or WOTUS rule, As you know, in June of 2015, the Obama administration finalized a new rule which expanded the scope of waters protected by the Clean Water Act. While I support efforts to reduce surface water contamination, the way that the 2015 WOTUS rule was written did not work for Arizona and wound up defining irrigation ditches, dry riverbeds, and washes as waters of the United States when there's no water. While these rules were repealed last year, I understand the EPA is considering reevaluating the WOTUS rules in the coming months. So as Assistant Administrator for Water, how will you ensure the EPA takes into account the unique geographies of desert southwestern states like Arizona?
Thank you for the question, Senator Kelly. And I think the example that you just provided from Arizona is why, if confirmed, I will do the work of the Office of Water based on the wisdom, the experience, the practical implementation of what these rules look like in communities around the country. To your question of how is it that we will consider the very diverse ecosystems, topographies, geography, when it relates to water. So one of the things that Administrator Regan has really directed us to do is to have robust stakeholder engagement around understanding both how 2015 was implemented, how the 2020 rule is currently being implemented. And so one of the things that we plan to do is initiate listening sessions this summer. And then in the fall, what we have been talking about with Army Corps, who jointly developed the WOTUS rule, as you know, with EPA, that we'll be doing regional roundtables. And it really, Senator Kelly, the reason we want to do these regional roundtables is we recognize that, when we create a national definition like waters of the U.S., it looks different. I'm still living in California, so share the arid state concerns that you have in Arizona, and so it looks different there than it does in the Great Lakes or in the Southeast. And so we will be having these regional conversations to really better understand the very concern that you have raised.
Well, thank you, Ms. Fox. I look forward to helping us come up with a good list of stakeholders in the state of Arizona for this summer and fall. Dr. Freedhoff, I want to discuss for my remaining time here EPA regulatory actions with regard to semiconductor production in the United States. As you know, in January, EPA issued 5 final rules under TSCA for certain chemicals that are persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic. One rule was for phenol isopropylated phosphate 3,1, which is a chemical widely used in semiconductor manufacturing. And after hearing belated concerns from industry, I appreciate that the EPA has reopened the comment period and provided a no-action assurance, and hope that semiconductor producers fully take advantage of this additional time to help shape the final rule. And as the Senate prepares to consider efforts to promote additional semiconductor manufacturing in the U.S., has EPA engaged with the Department of Commerce to discuss ways to provide regulatory stability under TSCA for the semiconductor industry?
Thanks very much for that question, Senator, and I appreciated talking to you about that issue when we met privately. As you pointed out, those 5 rules were finalized by the last administration, and honestly, the last administration, from a process perspective, did nothing wrong when it finalized those rules, because they asked for public comment, they reached out to stakeholders, and they really tried very hard to get the input of the regulated companies that would be subject to it. So, as you said, when we started hearing from your constituents and many other companies across the country with their concerns that they hadn't really realized the implications of these rules on their business, we did take quick action to give them some more time and flexibility to give us the information that we need. And we really do encourage them and other industry sectors to bring us that information, because I know the EPA career staff want to address all of the valid concerns that have been raised about those rules. In terms of what you're asking about interagency coordination, there's actually a TSCA interagency coordinating group. And that group consists of representatives from many different agencies, including the Department of Commerce, the Department of Defense, NASA, the Small Business Administration, and many others as well. And our career scientists meet with them on a regular basis. I think it's more frequently than once a month. Sometimes it's weekly, depending on what we're doing. And we do that because we really have a strong interest in understanding what other agencies feel their needs are as we move forward with regulatory actions.
Well, thank you, Dr. Freedhoff. My time's expired. I'll now recognize Senator Ernst for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I welcome our witnesses here today and look forward to our discussion. So, Ms. Fox, I'll start with you, please. And I'm going to take what Senator Kelly was talking about with the 2015 WOTUS rule and just add a little bit to that, because as you see, there's a bipartisan disagreement with the 2015 rule that was put into place. I adamantly was opposed to what we saw under the Obama administration in 2015. It was very damaging to the state of Iowa, and what we saw with that rule and the way it was defined, those new waters of the U.S. then allowed the federal government, or would have allowed the federal government, to regulate 97% of Iowa's land, not just water, but land. So I know that we talked about stakeholders, and I'm really glad to hear you say that, because many of my constituents felt that their concerns were ignored during the 2015 WOTUS rulemaking process. And in 2014, the Obama administration's very own SBA Office of Advocacy submitted comments to the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers arguing that the agencies hadn't conformed to the Regulatory Flexibility Act's requirements that small business concerns be considered. So you've mentioned you want to bring stakeholders to the table. What will you do specifically to ensure that the concerns of all of these impacted stakeholders, especially as you look at states across the Midwest, maybe in California, those that are in agriculture, those concerns are addressed in the event that a new definition is proposed?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And, one thing I will say is that in my former role as the CEO of the U.S. Water Alliance, I had the opportunity to spend quite a lot of time in Iowa. We had our One Water Summit every year, and Iowa brought the biggest delegation of farmers and water utilities and business leaders. When I hosted something called the One Water for America listening sessions, we went to Iowa to hear about really the tremendous innovation that is happening on both water quality and farm profitability, because we saw municipalities and farmers working upstream, downstream. In fact, last year, during my final year at the U.S. Water Alliance, we awarded the Iowa Soybean Association the U.S. Water Prize because I truly believe that it's through collaboration and partnership that we will get the work of protecting our nation's waters and protecting our agricultural productivity, at the same time. So what I commit to, if confirmed, is, I want us to find an enduring definition of waters of the U.S. That's what Administrator Regan wants. We don't want to see this ping pong anymore of, for our career staff at EPA, they've written 3 rules in 6 years. That seems crazy to me. Mm-hmm. And so what we are very committed to, Administrator Regan and I, is to understand the implementation challenges of both rules in communities around the country, and to work with folks like you, your constituents, to get to something that's enduring. We would love to have a definition that does not shift as administration shift, and I would love to have the opportunity to work very closely with you to make that happen, if confirmed.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I do hope that we can move on to a definition that would be enduring. I think absolutely you are correct there, but we have a lot of different states with a lot of different needs, and the nexus really does have to be water, not a bunch of land surrounding an intermittent stream or whatever it might be, but it needs to be about water. So I do have a question about WOTUS and the 30 by 30. I'm not sure what agency is actually going to be in charge of the 30 by 30 rule that's being proposed by President Biden. Is that the EPA? Is it USDA? Do you happen to know? Okay, because this plan has been proposed, but nobody really knows who's going to administer this, and we have no idea how we arrive at putting 30% of America's lands in a protected status. I talked to Secretary Vilsack. We had an informal questions session with him a few weeks ago, and he told my senior senator, Chuck Grassley, oh, we're going to get this done by using CRP. Well, I don't see how that works. CRP is for vulnerable lands. Not every state farms. So I'm not sure. I guess maybe he just wants to take it away from those of us that farm. But does the Biden administration plan to use
Senator, your time's expired. Go ahead and ask this question, but then we'll have to go to
okay, thank you,
Senator
Mr. Chair. So we'll take this for the record, but we just want to know about the definition of WOTUS and how it ties into the 30 by 30, because what we are concerned about in Iowa is that the federal government starts using expanded definitions and rules that then to take away land, productive land from farmers and put it in a protected status. We do not want to see that. I think that's federal government overreach. I'll send the question to you and we'll do it for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Would you like to respond just briefly to that question? You can do more in writing later on, but anything you want to say right now, you're welcome to.
I'm happy to answer that question for the record, but I think, Senator Ernst, one thing that is going to guide the work of the Office of Water, if confirmed, is we have to balance all of these interests of water quality, ensuring the profitability of our farmers who feed the nation, right? They feed the world. So we have to balance those things. And what you can count on me, if confirmed as the AA for Water, is that I will always listen to your constituencies. I will hear them out. And as I make decisions, I will always loop back with you and them, because I really think that through partnership, through collaboration, and through really transparent decision-making, that's what's going to be best for the people of this country, and you have my commitment on that.
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate the commitment.
Sometimes I ask people, Senator, and sometimes I ask people who've been married a long time, what's the secret to being married a long time? As you might imagine, I get hilarious answers, and I actually write them down and use them from time to time for comic relief. One of my favorite answers, though, is communicate and compromise. Communicate and compromise, and that's also the secret to a vibrant democracy. I'd add a third C, and that would be collaboration. Communicate, compromise, collaboration. And I think that's what we're hearing both of you talking about today. I welcome it. Thanks so much for joining us. All right, Dr. Padilla, Senator Padilla, I know you're out there somewhere on that WebEx. Senator Padilla, you're recognized next, and if we don't have anybody else intervene, then Senator Kramer would be after you. All right, Senator Padilla, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And for the record, I am not a doctor, nor do I play one on TV. But I have a couple questions and topics I'd like to raise with Ms. Estenoz regarding the National Park System. We know that it's a source of pride for so many Americans. Our national parks boast not just stunning scenery and our national monuments and historical parks, but it helps tell the story of our country. However, the stories told by our park system don't completely paint the full mosaic of America, nor does it adequately preserve the full culture and legacy of all Americans. We have a lot of work to do to diversify our national parks and monuments. Too few sites focus on the experience of Black, Asian, and Native Americans, or teach us about our Latino heritage. And we don't have enough parks and monuments proudly dedicated to the contributions of the LGBTQ community, and not nearly enough sites that celebrate the contributions of women to our nation's history. So Just wondering if you can talk for a minute about how you would work with the Biden administration to ensure that the National Park Service sites better tell America's rich and diverse history.
Thank you so much, Senator, for that question. This is an incredibly important priority for the administration and for the secretary. You know, the National Park Service in many ways is our government's sort of preeminent experts on the power of place and how important places can be in our effort to tell story. And you're right, I agree 100%, as does the secretary, that the range of stories that we tell isn't broad enough. It doesn't tell the full rich story of America, and it is an absolutely high priority for us to fix that problem and to think of our national park sites, which some of them are parks, but they're also historic and scenic trails. We have historic sites. We have national seashores, and there are a rich diversity of stories to be told at most of those sites. And so if I am confirmed, this will be a top priority for me. It's a top priority for the secretary. You know, and this includes telling the rich story of our indigenous communities and revitalizing our commitment to telling the stories of tribal nations and involving them in weaving those stories and sharing them with visitors to our national park sites. So I very much appreciate the question.
Thank you. Well, I look forward to working with you in the administration on that in the years ahead. Next question, it's on a topic that was raised earlier about access to outdoor spaces, but I want to dig a little bit deeper. As you know, too many children, especially in communities of color, grow up without real access to outdoor spaces. Nationwide, 3/4 of people of color live in nature-deprived communities. Los Angeles County, not just my home state, but my home county, is one of the most densely populated regions in the country, yet it has one of the lowest rates of park access. Its 3.3 acres of park space per 1,000 residents is just half as much as the median in other high-density areas. And the COVID pandemic has shown us how important access to the outdoors is, and that our local parks can bring just as many mental and physical and educational benefits to the residents as a national park. So I want to thank you for your work in helping to rescind President Trump's Secretarial Order 3388 and reinstating funding for the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, which helps fund parks in park-poor urban communities. And I would encourage the administration to go big and include a robust funding request for this program in the next fiscal year budget. So again, I know it was brought up earlier in the hearing, but if you want to speak for a few more minutes on how you would approach the work to ensure more urban communities in particular can access quality green spaces.
Thank you, Senator. Again, this is a part of the similar issue, but the equal access to nature and providing, I mean, just the year that we've been through as a nation is perfect evidence of how important it is for folks to have access to outdoor spaces. And so many Americans this year have taken refuge in the parks in their neighborhoods and in their communities. And for folks who don't have access to those areas, it's been that much harder to cope with the year that we've lived through. So as I mentioned earlier, we just 2 days ago announced a $150 million investment in the ORLP program. This is the largest investment. It's a competitive grant program. One of the things that is a high priority for us is to ensure that communities have the opportunity to actually compete for those dollars. And so, we're working hard internally to ensure that we're promoting the program, that we are offering our technical assistance to folks who want to try to participate in that program. And now that the Congress has invested in full funding of LWCF, that is a absolute game changer for communities who need and deserve greater access to the outdoors. in their lives and in their communities.
Well, thank you for that. Again, look forward to working with you on this in the years ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Senator Padilla, thanks so much for joining us today and for those questions. And Senator Kramer is back for a second round. I think Senator Markey's trying to join us, and the vote starts on in the Senate with 2 votes, and one is going to start the first one in about 3 or 4 minutes, but we have some time. Senator Kramer, thanks for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks again to all of you. Ms. Fox, I'm as I mentioned during the first round, I wanted to get to WOTUS, and you've answered a lot of WOTUS questions since I've been here, and you've done very well with them. And so I'm just going to add my illustration and ask some pretty simple questions, I think. But you know, last Congress in this committee, we did hold a hearing on the Trump WOTUS rule. One of the witnesses was the North Dakota Commissioner of Agriculture, Doug Goring. And Doug testified, quote, "The most fundamental management practice in agriculture is effective water management, either to retain, conserve, or convey. An overly rigid one-size-fits-all federal intervention and regulatory oversight is not reasonable, not workable, and not appropriate," unquote. Now, Administrator Regan, whose nomination I supported in this committee and on the floor, has said the EPA is going to rewrite the regulation again, but not as the Obama administration did in 2015. And you've echoed that sentiment a couple of times. I like consistency within an administration, Mr. Chairman. North Dakota successfully litigated against the 2015 regulation, which would have laid claim to over 80% of our landmass with its 4,000-foot buffer. In 2006, if we're looking for a definition, I think Justice Scalia got it exactly right in his majority opinion when he set the standard for continuous surface water connection to relatively permanent bodies of water. Now, there's a little vagueness in a few of those words, but nonetheless, I think it's a pretty good starting point. And so with that in mind, I want to refer to this map of North Dakota, and just to help people understand, we literally are, people always, you know, say they're something. We literally are the center of the North American continent. There's a monument in Rugby, North Dakota that says this is the center of the North American continent. We are prairies. We are badlands. Theodore Roosevelt National Park, the only national park named after a person. Place matters, right? This is where his ranches are, right out here in the Badlands. Badlands, limestone, sandstone, cactus, Badlands. This map illustrates what would fall under waters of the U.S. definition, navigable waters. Now, I have a pontoon. I live on a bay of the Missouri River. If I can't drive my pontoon on it, I know it's not navigable, right? But this is a whole bunch of stuff that you couldn't drive a pontoon on. So anyway, obviously, WOTUS is at the heart of agriculture, as you've been hearing from others. It's very near and dear to North Dakotans. We want to get it right. And so I'm just going to ask you some really basic questions. First of all, and I think you've testified to this, but they didn't get it right in 2015. Do you think, did they get it right in 2015?
Senator Kramer, it sounds like, first of all, that Shannon and I need to do a joint trip together so that we can understand the two very visual challenges. So maybe we could do that.
That would be fun. Yeah.
Okay.
The administrators promised to do it too, but you know, you can either come with him or another time.
You know, Senator Kramer, again, we all want an enduring rule. I think we want an enduring definition that is national, but really can address the particular local circumstances of water. And as we know, water is also changing rapidly, right? With, you know, the Great Lakes are warming, parts of California, Arizona are drying very rapidly, right? And so how do we create a rule that can withstand the test of time and respect the local needs, right? And that is really what Administrator Regan wants. That's what he's directed me to do. That's what I want to do. I want to get it right, and I want to get it right with all of you. And so I hope you will help us with that.
Yeah, you raise a really good point. Both you and the administrator, I think, bring a really valuable experience. He is a state regulator. You as somebody who's been in a regulated industry, although not agriculture, but again, WOTUS clearly important. And that's what gives me hope, as well as your willingness to talk, to collaborate, to communicate. There are lots of C's that work. Carper, Capito, Cardin, Kramer. I mean, there's lots of C words at work.
And Kramer.
And then Kramer, right? So I think I look forward to that. I really do. I'm an eternally optimistic person, Mr. Chairman. And so anyway, you're invited. You're welcome. you can leave the administrator at home or bring him with if you want, but he's coming too at some point. And I do think you raised an important point. In fact, and this would have been relevant to the previous discussion too. The changing of water, that's been going on for centuries, and that's part of why North Dakota farmers didn't drain. They moved with the water. They farmed when it was dry. If it was wet over here, then the next year and it was dry over there, they farmed over here, because they valued having that water around them. They were just naturally conservationists, but they reject the notion that the federal government's going to tell them how to do it if not a partner. With that, thank you both.
Thank
you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Kramer. One of the, you can never have too many C's. There's a good spirit here. I hope this is a good spirit that we can continue and to embrace as we go forward and address what are some thorny issues, but really important issues for all different parts of our country. I'd like to come back to you, Ms. Estenoz, and have a question. And I think Senator Markey is trying to get here, and I won't stretch it out too long, but we'll try to make sure he has a second shot here. Ms. Estenoz, our committee has spent considerable time in recent years. I've been on this committee for 20 years. I love this committee. I feel so fortunate to serve on it. But we've spent in recent years deliberating matters involving the Endangered Species Act. And while the Endangered Species Act is one of our nation's most popular and successful environmental laws, it's not without controversy, as you know. And that said, I believe we can all agree more than we disagree when it comes to preserving and when it comes to implementing this bedrock law. And my question, Ms. Estenoz, is, in your opinion, how can the Department of Interior best foster collaboration, one of those C's, versus conflict, another C, when it comes to the Endangered Species Act?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. I think it's such an important one because we've talked a little bit with some of the other questions that, and some of the other discussion earlier about how important recovery is in the Endangered Species Act as an ultimate driver of what we want to try to do. And, there's a whole movement of, regarding, conservation without conflict and moving past conflict to cooperation and collaboration, just to keep the C theme going here. And, in my experience in Florida, that's when we've gotten the most done, even when we're dealing with listed species, even when we're dealing with species that are on the brink. And we have a couple. We have a couple in Florida, and we have many, too many. In our country. We have some 12,000 species that need conservation assistance to avoid extinction, and that's too many. And I think everyone would think that that's too many. I don't think that's a particularly controversial statement. We are not going to recover those species or improve their conservation status unless we can work together. And as I said earlier, some of the strongest expertise when it comes to specific species management, it's on the ground. It's the folks who are closest to those species, and it's incumbent upon Fish and Wildlife Service. And frankly, I think we do a good job integrating our work with, particularly through, for example, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies throughout the country. There are tremendously strong relationships in the people on the ground there. It's really great to watch. We need to empower those relationships and those partnerships. If I'm confirmed, it will be my job to support them and to encourage that collaboration. And if I am confirmed, I will pledge to do just that.
Sometimes I do that as we wait for Senator Markey. I just want each of you to take a minute and talk to us about your top priorities, just one or two top priorities. We've heard from you about some of the pressing issues that face our nation and the roles that you'll be playing, but I'd like, before we finish up, to get your perspective on maybe some additional matters that you expect to address once you take office. And we'll just mention, if you will, for us, a couple of your top priorities. And Dr. Freedhoff, I'm going to ask you just to start off. Just talk about some of your top priorities briefly.
Well, thanks very much, Chairman. I'd say number one is really implementing TSCA and recognizing that when that law was enacted, everyone, environmental organizations, industry groups, Republicans, Democrats, everyone wanted EPA to have the authority that it needed to protect families and workers all across this country from unsafe chemicals. And so getting that program, off the ground and starting to write some of those protective chemical safety rules is one of my first priorities. And second, I would say it's about trust. And I think, there was, in the past 4 years, there was a lot of fantastic science that went on in the agency, but there were also some examples of times when the scientists were told to change their conclusions or exclude data, or when people that raised concerns were kicked out of meetings and told that they couldn't work on those things anymore. And I think as a result of some of those decisions, again, not everything that happened in the last 4 years, but as a result of some of those decisions, when EPA says that a chemical or a pesticide can be used safely, sometimes people don't trust us. And I think the public needs to trust us. And that's not just good for the environment and for human health. I think it's also really important that the public has confidence in the products that companies make, and that when we say the chemicals that they use are safe, they really are. And so I think working to restore trust in what the agency says about the safety of chemicals and pesticides is one of my other top priorities that I hope to work on if confirmed.
I'd say thank you for that very much. I'd say your daughters are sitting behind you on over your left shoulder. The former chairman of this committee was a fellow from Wyoming, John Barrasso. And he's still in the Senate, but not on this committee anymore. But he and I love music, and we used to like to interplay musical lyrics when appropriate with the comments that we'd make from the dais. And one of the songs we liked to quote was by a one-hit wonder named Thomas Dolby. She blinded me with science. And some of you may remember that song, great song. And we don't need to be blinded by science, but we need to be guided by science. And I think we have in the witnesses here before us today adherence to that principle. And I would like to think we have on this committee and in the new administration a real strong desire to be guided by science. So thank you for that. Top priority, Radhika Fox, please. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Senator. So I had a chance to talk a little bit earlier about some of the priorities around implementing our infrastructure programs well, PFAS, affordability. I wanted to add a couple. One is, and to really build on Michal's point, and this is something that we talk about quite often, is really the tremendous career staff that exist across all of the offices at EPA. And, I think one of my internal priorities is really around supporting them, building their morale. We have a big agenda when it comes to water. They have decades and decades of experience, and so that will be a big internal priority. Another internal priority that I have, if confirmed, it goes back to what Senator Whitehouse said earlier around science. One of the first things that I did was meet with our scientific integrity official. I got briefed on concerns that had been raised around scientific integrity over the previous administration. And I issued a memo to the entire Office of Water to say, if there's ever concerns around scientific integrity, there will always be an open door policy. So I think, in addition to pursuing the big water agenda that President Biden and Vice President Harris has laid out for us, to also do the internal work so that we have a strong, productive workforce that is valued and respected for all of their contributions. So that would be another big priority of mine.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Fox. Ms. Estenoz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my priorities roughly fall into three categories, and sticking with our alliteration theme, they are policy, program, and people. I too am a music fan, and so Stephen Stills is a fan is very important to me.
Something's happening here.
Something is happening here, indeed. So my policy priorities are the President's and the Secretary's policy priorities. So if I'm confirmed, my job will be to help the National Park Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service contribute to our efforts to tackle climate change, our efforts to increase equal access to nature, to tell all of America's stories, to recommit ourselves to our government-to-government trust responsibilities to tribes, and to build back better by investing in our infrastructure on our public lands, our coastal resilience, so many of the issues that we've heard today. Programmatically, I think right off the bat, my priority is going to be in the implementation of the Great American Outdoors Act and the fully funded Land and Water Conservation Fund, a huge responsibility.
That should be a lot of fun.
I'm already having fun and looking forward to more. Just the commitment that the Congress made last year is, I and so many Americans are so grateful for it. And it's really now our job to make sure that we squeeze every ounce of value out of every single dollar and we get it on the landscape working for the American people. And then speaking of people, my other priority is supporting our career workforce. You know, our people have had a rough year, just like every other American has had a rough year. The National Park Service is facing what could be one of the busiest summers for our national parks and national wildlife refuges in the history of those services. And so part of my priority will be to ensure that they feel supported and that they have the tools that they need to welcome America back to our public lands over the next year as we come out of this COVID crisis and take refuge in the beautiful places that the services that I have the pleasure of working with are responsible for. So thank you so much for the question, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Mark, I'm told, is on his way, and I don't want to disappoint him by leaving me with an empty room, and hopefully he'll make it soon. While we're waiting for another minute or two, I would, is there a question, I like to ask this sometimes when we have time, but is there a question you wish you'd been asked that you have not been asked by anyone on this panel? We'll start with Dr. Freedhoff. What was the question maybe you would wish you'd been asked, but you didn't get it?
I'm sorry, Senator, you wanted to know what question?
Yeah, what was the question you would like to have been asked that no one has asked you?
You know, I would like to have been asked how the agency responded to COVID. And the reason for that is because my part of the agency literally dropped everything in order to respond to the virus. And about 100 of our career scientists stopped what they were doing and focused all of their efforts onto approving about 550 different disinfectants that were certified as effective against COVID, and also helped support the agency's efforts to crack down on fraudulent claims made by companies about COVID products. And they really rose to the challenge and met it. And it was very important for both the country and the agency that they did so.
Thank you. Next time we'll be sure to ask that question. Thank you. Senator Markey is joined us, Senator.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize to you.
Glad you could make it.
No,
you can make it second time.
We're still in the midst of the Commerce Committee markup, and just Wednesdays. We used to say in Boston, Wednesday's a Prince Spaghetti Day. Now we just say Wednesday's a day when every committee meets simultaneously. And you can be omniscient, but you cannot be ubiquitous. So I apologize to you for not being here.
I'm glad you're here.
Dr. Freedhoff, you back in 2016, you worked with me on the issue of PCBs, which contaminate as many as 25,000 schools across the country. Despite being banned by the EPA in 1979, students should be learning their ABCs, not their PCBs, and that's still a situation in our country right now. So I'm planning on reintroducing the Get Toxic Substances Out of Schools Act, which would reauthorize and expand Title V of TSCA to help schools remove PCBs and other toxic substances. Are you going to be working on that issue? And I'd love to partner with you in moving legislation that could give you more power to deal with that issue.
Thanks very much, Senator Markey, and I appreciated talking to you about this as well earlier in the week. It's funny. One of the first calls that I had with our acting regional administrators, it was just an opportunity to get to know them all. More than half of them, I'd say, from all across the country, raised this very issue with me. Because you're absolutely right. It's not just PCBs, it's asbestos, and it's other toxic substances as well. And the challenge that they really face is that as these schools age, the PCBs and the asbestos are released from those schools and actually have in the past exposed both teachers and students. And a lot of the time also these schools are in economically and otherwise underserved communities that are also at risk of other environmental exposures in disproportionate ways to, compared to other communities. So I think there's great interest at the agency in working with you on this, and I look forward to that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And there's kind of a way of looking at these environmental issues which says, oh my goodness, they're so expensive. They're going to create real problems in our society if we really try to remediate it. But the other side of the coin is it's a job creator, for construction, painting, and other occupations that would have to go in and do this work. So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Senator, to raise that. And I would add additionally on that is that a lot of state budgets are probably pretty challenged because of what they've gone through in the past year on COVID. And so I actually think that a lot of schools that might have been otherwise slated for remodeling or reconstruction are going to have to wait a lot longer because of the challenges to state budgets. And so I sort of see it as a win-win-win. It's win for the environment, it's win for jobs, and it's win for the children and the teachers who are in those schools every day.
Yeah, and I thank you for that. In terms of using this funding that is going to be at the EPA under your leadership, to more quickly evaluate dangerous chemicals. You may have already answered the question, but could you talk about that, how you are going to try to telescope the time frame to deal with these issues under the constraints that exist statutorily?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that was one of the provisions that you cared the most about, as I recall, is making sure that the chemicals that EPA already knew they had concerns about were moved along at a faster time frame. And so what we're doing right now is we're taking a sort of forensic look back at the first 10 risk evaluations that were completed in the last administration. And our objective is to move as many of them as possible into rulemaking as quickly as we can. And there may be times when we have to supplement some of them in order to make sure that the rules that flow from them are as protective and legally defensible as they need to be. But really, our focus is on giving Americans the chemical safety protections that everyone expected EPA to provide.
Yeah, so as you're looking back at the previous administration, there are flaws in the methodology which was used by the preceding administration. And of course, our goal is to make sure that families aren't exposed to asbestos, aren't exposed to other dangerous chemicals. So how are you going to fix those flawed chemical risk evaluations completed by the previous administration to ensure that they account for legacy exposures and use the best available science?
Well, the court, on legacy exposures, there was actually a court decision telling the agency that the law clearly expected the agency to consider legacy exposures, and that was about the asbestos risk evaluation, and the agency is certainly going to abide by that court decision. But more generally, I think the expectation in TSCA was that EPA would study the chemicals comprehensively. And that means knowing whether people are getting exposed from the air, from the water, from the disposal of those chemicals. And so what we're doing now is we're going through those first 10, pretty intensively. But we also recognize that the point of TSCA was to write chemical safety rules that were protective. And so what we want to do is move past the risk evaluation phase and into the protection phase of our activities just as quickly as we can.
Yeah, so when I entered Congress, I had Chelsea, which was the poorest and most vulnerable community in New England, had huge exposure to lead in the schools. So that was like the first project that I worked on, and that's, again, the poorest community in New England. We saw during the coronavirus pandemic that Chelsea has extremely high asthma rates, and as a result, that made them more vulnerable to the coronavirus. And when we were working together on Woburn and the toxic site in Woburn, that goes back to the 1970s when the EPA and other agencies were just turning a blind eye, which ultimately led to the creation of the Superfund law, which I was proud to be a part of in 1981 and getting that law around the books. So,
Senator Markey, your time's expired, and we're running into overtime. We're running out of time on the floor. So if you want to wrap it up really quickly.
I will wrap up quickly. Environmental justice, Dr. Freedhoff. You know, how can we ensure that it's built into every single part of the activities taken by this administration?
I appreciate the question. And you know what? Congress told us to study potentially exposed and susceptible subpopulations. We have to consider those subpopulations every time we study a chemical. And I do think we could be doing more with that authority than has been done in the past administration. But so I think one thing that we're really focused on now with those first 10 is really looking at whether there are fence line communities, communities that have been disproportionately exposed to pollution from chemical companies and other things, and seeing whether there is more that we need to do to supplement those risk evaluations as we move to rulemaking.
Yep, you're going to do a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Mark, I'm going to ask you just to stay in the room for another minute, if you will, before you go, and I'll go with you. Let me just close by saying how pleased I am to talk to my colleagues as they come and go, and almost without exception, the comments are just would really warm the hearts of your moms and dads, and maybe even your daughters. Very good job. And we've been fortunate to hear from 3 outstanding nominees for critical roles at the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of the Interior, into a person. You are experienced, you're diligent, and you're committed public servants. And just want to close by thanking you all once again for your willingness to share your wisdom, your expertise and inclusive instincts with our nation, and to again say to your 3 days after Mother's Day, our thanks to the moms that brought you into the room, and maybe your dads and husbands who might be sharing you with, and your children, for sharing you with all of us. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a variety of materials that include letters from stakeholders and other materials that relate to today's nomination hearing without objection. Senators will be allowed to submit questions for the record through close of business on this Friday, May 14th, and we'll compile those questions, send them to our witnesses, and ask our witnesses to reply to us by Wednesday, May the 19th. If you could do that, that would be very helpful. And I think with that, it's a wrap, and we thank you all again. Hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.